it out to everybody. And then with that said, let me get this whole shebang started. There we go. Can everybody see that? Picking the picture of the first page?
Yep.
Okay, good deal. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Oh, got some more people coming in. So I want to welcome everybody for coming tonight. Thanks a lot for being here with me. I was barely here. I'll tell you what, I got to tell you a story. I went up to Petersburg, Alaska last week and helped a guy move a yacht from Petersburg to Bellingham, Washington. So it was like a 1,000-mile trip we took in this boat. And it was like a 1,000-mile trip we took in this boat. And it was the first day we left and we had a little mechanical issue about 4 or 5 hours into the trip. So we had to circle around and go all the way back. Well, we lost a day on that first day. And then the mechanic showed up late the next day. And then when the mechanic showed up late, they were late getting it fixed. It wasn't, nothing's easy on that, but it was a fixable problem that they had. The turbo went out on the diesel engine. And so it was a fixable problem that they had, but we didn't launch till 8 o'clock that next evening. So already we're almost 24 hours, we're almost 2 days behind on our trekking. So then we start off on this trip. Beautiful trip, by the way. We saw whales, we saw sea otters, saw white-sided dolphins, saw glaciers, saw all kinds of cool stuff. I mean, it's imagine doing an Alaskan cruise if you've ever done that before. Imagine doing an Alaskan cruise, but it's just me and my wife and the guy that owns the boat and a couple of crew members and a couple other people he invited. Real small group that was on this thing. And so because we were delayed a little bit going in, we hit some bad weather. And I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Perfect Storm, but there's a scene in that. It had George Clooney in it way back in the day. I think it came out in the 90s. But there was a scene where this boat was on the side of this gigantic wave. Now, I'd be exaggerating if I said the wave was that big, but we hit some pretty big waves out on that boat. And so it got pretty rocky. Lucky for me, I don't get motion sickness. So it was kind of a bare knuckle event, but our lives weren't in any danger. I mean, the boat, the waves were nothing the boat couldn't handle. But as someone who hasn't been on the ocean that much like that, they were pretty big waves. And lucky for me, I don't get motion sickness. Lucky for the captain, he didn't get motion sickness, but unlucky for everybody else, they did. So it was a pretty miserable 4 or 5 hours when we were traveling through that part of Canada and the open water through there. It was just pretty rough. And but it was a good time. So because we got delayed in the weather and all that, I was a day late coming home. And so even until I got to the airport yesterday, I still wasn't sure if I was going to make it here. So, but I made it. And so here we are, and we'll get started on this webinar tonight. Again, the subject tonight, and I've had this question a lot from people, is, when you're picking out pictures, how do you know what's a good one from a bad one? And so I'm going to share with you just sort of some of the basics that I kind of go through in my mind. And and by this time for me, it's muscle memory. It's like if you pick up a tennis racket or you pick up a pickleball racket, if you're getting good at anything, after a while you just don't think about it. It just comes instinctively. And that's how this does for me. But I thought about, and I've had a lot of people ask me that question, and I put a lot of thought into it, especially when I was on the boat, since I had time to think about what do I look for when I pick a picture? What are some of those specific points I can point out to you guys to help you understand what I'm looking for when I look for the pictures? When I decide on my own pictures, this one's better than that one, or if I'm judging a photo contest, this one's better than that one. And so I look at all that stuff. And if you don't know me, again, thanks for signing up for the webinar. My name is Russell Graves. I'm coming to you live from Hackberry Farm, just north of Dodge City, Texas. And I'm glad to be home. I've been gone for a while. It's a wonderful day outside. It was beautiful, but I've spent the whole day in meetings and returning emails and sitting in front of the computer. And as everybody knows, it's great to travel, but it all comes back to haunt you in the end when you have to come back to your real life. And so I've been going at it pretty hard today, but this is like a vacation for me. As you've heard me say before, I'm the lone photo enthusiast community of Dodge City, Texas. So anytime anybody wants to talk photography with me, I'll do it 100% of the time. As I go through this, keep in mind that I want this to be a dialogue and not a monologue. So if you have any questions as I go through this, you want me to clarify something, I often tell people jokingly that I speak two primary languages. One is Texan and the other is American English, and I probably speak American English uh, worse than I do Texan. And so if I say something that you don't quite understand with my distinct Texas accent, just let me know and I'll clarify anything. And you can do that by turning on your microphone and ask away. You're not going to disturb me there. You can pop it into the chat box, and I'm going to be paying attention there as we go through there. So with that said, I think we've got everybody that's going to join in tonight. And again, thanks everybody for being here. We'll go ahead and get started. You know, really ultimately picking the picture is you know, I'll use this because I'm bragging on myself a little bit. It's not all, it was a 2-person job, but we managed to do it. But last month, I'm proud to say I celebrated my 30th wedding anniversary. And as I think back, you know, how do you find the one? If I'm giving advice to our 2 kids about finding the one, how do you find the one? You just know it when you see it. And that's kind of how I am with pictures too. You just, you know it when you see it, because everything, to pardon the pun, seems to click at that moment. Everything comes together. The composition's good, the lighting's good, the pose is good, everything. But I'm going to break down some of the things that I specifically look for when I'm trying to figure out, you know, how do you know that's the one? And look, let me say this too. I say this on a lot of things. One of the things that we colloquially say in Texas is there's a million ways to skin a cat, and that means there's a lot of different ways of doing this. There's a lot of different ways to do photography. There's a lot of different ways to think about photography. I'm not going to say my way is the best way. I'm just saying my way is my way. And I'll always say I can improve and learn to be better. So that's why I love the feedback, because every time I engage with someone on any kind of matter, I learn a little something, and it helps me kind of think about the perspective better. And it really helps me become a better teacher in the end, because it gives me insight on how I deliver things and how other people think. And it's just a constant growing process. So with whatever I say tonight, if you disagree with me, feel free to chime in. You're not going to hurt my feelings. If you don't understand what I'm saying, just feel free to chime in. If you want to know specifically why I like that picture, I can do a pretty good job of breaking that stuff down. So just let me know. All right. And so every time I take a picture of something, in every different series, I look at pictures like these, this mule deer on the left, or the coyote on the upper right, or the white-tailed deer on the lower right. They were all taken at, you know, not the same day, but on 3 different series. And it's always something that kind of catches my eye on all of these. I'm not going to spoil the beans just yet. I'll get into kind of what I'm talking about as we go into this. But there's something about these pictures that really sort of stand out to me. And it helps me understand that of all the pictures I'm looking at, that's the one. And so when you look at a picture of a bobcat, when everything comes together, the lighting's right and the pose is right. And this, by the way, this picture's been cropped to fit this slide. And if you look at the original composition, you can see his feet. But I left the important stuff and cut off the less important stuff for this composition. But to take a picture like this is quite a feat. And see what I did there? I made me an acronym to help you remember this. And the feet stands for something. And that's the thing that I've been thinking about this week, is how can I explain this the best? And how can I come up with something that maybe will help you remember what I look for and what you can look for in these pictures? And at least, at the very least, give you a framework to help you start analyzing your images a little more critically and trying to discern what's okay from what's good. I'm not going to say what's bad, because all that's in the eye of the beholder ultimately. And pictures are so subjective. I've got pictures that, in a classical sense, they may not be considered good, but they bring back a memory, or they make me think of something I did right then, or it's evocative in some reason. And so that the whole game is just interpretation of what your interpretation is. But if I can break it down to specifics, my specifics all revolve around the concept of right here is feet. And so, as I told you, feet's an acronym, and it's an acronym for focus. And I'm going to break each one of these down for you individually as we go through here, and explain more a little bit. But even better than explain it, I'm going to show you in some pictures that I put together for this presentation to help you understand what I mean by feet. So it's focus, exposure, action, and then timing. Those are really the kind of that. If I can distill down my approach to looking at pictures, it's all this. And I was going to say this earlier, and again, this is just my approach. If this, what I'd love to hear is if someone has something they can add to this. Let's try to get this to spell something. I don't know what I was going for feature at first, if you want to know the truth, but I couldn't fill in the blanks on the U, R, and the E. I could kinda, but it didn't make sense to me. So I stopped it at feet because I think this encapsulated everything. But if this gives you a framework for that you can start editing your images, and not when I mean editing, picking the good ones for the bad ones, and you know why you're doing it. You're doing it with purpose because once you understand that, that's one of those light bulb moments that go off. I was telling someone this story a couple weeks ago. I was I can remember the day, and I wrote about this in a magazine story a year or two ago, and I was just retelling the story. I remember the day when I was about 2 miles north of where I sit right now on some land that my family's had leased for a long, long time, and I was sitting in the brush and I was blowing on a call that mimics an injured rabbit because I was trying to call in a predator. It's an old hunter's trick that they do, and I know these days there's some sensibilities on that. I don't want to really get to the whether that's ethical or not. But the fact is, I was doing it, and so I was calling for something, just hoping something would come up. And I'd had a couple of hawks fly through, and hawks are always attracted to that. They were just checking out what the sound was. But all of a sudden, I looked to my left, and coming through the brush, there was a cow. Kind of, he was at a quick trot, almost like a lope. If you think about a horse when they lope, he was kind of loping through the brush, and he ran right in front of me. I was shooting a 300 millimeter f2.8 lens, so the thing was really close to me because it was a full frame shot of the coyote. And I took the picture. And this is back in the day when I was shooting film, and everything was manual focus, and almost everything was manual settings. But I took the picture and I thought, I think that's going to be a good shot. But if you remember back in the day when we all shot film, you never really knew if it was a good shot or not until you wait. For me, living in rural Texas was always waiting a week or two before the pictures came back so you could see how good a shot it was. And I remember sending the film off at our local Walmart because back in the day, Walmart, even though they didn't develop slide film, and that's what I shot, they would send it off to a Fuji lab and let them develop it, and then I would get the pictures back, and it usually take a couple of weeks to get them back. And I remember going through those pictures, and then I got to that, because I had a light table, going through my pictures, and I got that one picture on the light table, and I looked at it, and my first thought was, because I'm like 24 years old, and my first thought was, I think they gave me someone else's film because that doesn't look like my picture. Then I looked at it and I realized that was the picture I took. And that's the moment all this stuff clicked for me. It all just kind of made sense at one time. And so all the things I've been learning up to that point about shutter speed and aperture at the time, ISO wasn't a really big deal because you couldn't change it. I mean, it was whatever the film was, that's the ISO you shot at. But and then camera handling techniques and stability techniques, all those things I learned, that was the moment it clicked. Well, as time went on and you start replicating that same basic set of skills that you would do to get your pictures, and I think this is what everyone wants to do, you're it's like any other activity you do you want to be good at. You can another text is saying a blind hog can find an acorn every once in a while. And what that means is if you stumble around long enough, you'll take a picture, a good picture from every now and then. But I think the challenge is how do you get where you're consistent time and time and time again, and you're confident enough that when you press the button on your camera, that the picture that's going to show up on that screen on the back of the camera is exactly like you thought it would be. And the only reason why you look is just to see what it looked like, just to relive the moment for a second. And so that's kind of the whole point of what we're talking about tonight is you build your skill set, your physical skill set, where you just understand and how to work the buttons and how to hold the camera steady and all that stuff, all the just the fundamentals of photography. How you get to the point in that, you get to the point in that where the whole game becomes a lot more consistent, where instead of taking a good picture every now and then, you're taking good pictures all the time. And then the second point is just understanding, what I look for, and then ultimately building you some techniques on what you look for when you're kind of looking for those pictures that really stand out to you. And so it's really trying to transcend from getting lucky every now and then to just being good enough where you know every picture you take is going to be a good one. And so that's what we'll talk about tonight. So I'm going to break down each one of these individually. And does anybody have any questions so far about anything? I don't see any chats coming in. Well, good. I will proceed. And so one of the first things I'll look at and is focus. And so I mentioned this before. I did a webinar. If you join my September webinar that I did in conjunction with B&H Photo, I did it on their platform, not on mine. But when I did it with them, if you joined in on that, or if you got a recording of it, I talked about the steps I go through on my workflow on just managing my images. That's what the whole webinar was about. What do I do when I get the images to the computer? How do I manage them, and how do I store them and catalog them so I can find them later? That's what the whole thing was about. And one thing I mentioned to them is one of the first things I do every single time is I will just check an image for focus and exposure. The first two, the F and the E, focus and exposure. And I'll just make sure that they kind of check the boxes for me. Now I know these days you can use tools like oh, I forgot, Topaz. That's what it is. I forgot what it's called. I've got it right here on my computer. I know you can use like Topaz to improve the focus a little bit if it's blurry. And I'll try it every now and then, but Topaz to me still makes the images look kind of funny. There's no substitute, in my opinion, than getting the images right out of the camera. And so I'll look at focus first. Is it in focus, and is it in close enough focus where I think I can retrieve it using one of the post-processing tools I have? And then is the exposure right? But when we talk about the focus, the initial thing I look at, it has more to do with the mechanical act of focusing the camera. Because there's pictures that I can show you. Oops. There's pictures I can show you like this one. Virtually everything about this image is out of focus. But the one most important thing that is in focus is what? It's the eyes. I read your lips, Bob. It's the eyes. The eyes are in focus on this picture. And because of that, even though everything else is out of focus, to me, that's what grabbed me. If you had to pin me down, I get asked this question all the time. What's your favorite picture ever taken? That's like asking which one of my children do I love the most? It's hard to pick. But if you had to ask me, what's your favorite coyote picture you've ever taken of all time? It's this one, because that picture was intentional. Everything about it was. That coyote came running by me. I saw it from 200 yards away. It was chasing something else. I was just sitting on the edge of a wheat field waiting for deer to show up. The coyote came running. And when I saw it there, I instantly thought, okay, this thing's going to run by me. I'm going to try to get a panning shot of it. And so I adjusted my shutter speed. So I'd have to go back and look at this. This is probably 1/20th of a second. I adjusted my shutter speed, made sure everything is right, and panned through it. And then, unlike the film, this is when everything clicked at this point. Unlike the film days where I had to wait, as soon as that coyote left, I immediately looked at the picture and thought, man, I nailed it. In fact, I've got a picture of it. I was so excited about this picture. I've got a picture of this coyote on my phone that I took of the back of my camera when I took it to send to my wife and say, check this one out. I was pretty proud of myself. But so when you're thinking about focus, it doesn't necessarily have to mean everything's in focus. Let's go back to this picture here. Like on this one, if you look at this thing critically, the tail's a little bit out of focus because the coyote's not completely square to me. And I love shooting wide open apertures with these big. I've got a 500 millimeter f4 lens that I shoot most of my wildlife stuff with. And I love shooting it wide open because I love the way the out of focus background looks. But really, the most important thing I look for on all these pictures, especially when we're talking about wildlife shots, are the eyes in focus. And if the eyes in focus, that'll usually check the box for me good enough, and I go to the next one. I just want to look at that picture one more time. I love that shot. In fact, I love it so much it's hanging on my wall right here above me. I'll show you another shot. I took a lot of pictures during this time, but I've included another shot in the same presentation that was later on in the sequence. It's another shot I love of this. So with this one right here, everything worked. And I'll get into why some of this works in a minute. I'm going to go back and forth on a lot of these pictures as I talk about the different concepts on that FEAT acronym, why this all works for me. Sound good? Okay, so I got a question coming in. Carrie asked if the images don't check the focus and exposure box, do you immediately delete them? Yeah, I usually do, Carrie, because I've got it's my attempt to be funny, but I've got this saying I tell people all the time: don't fall in love with something that's not going to love you back, and a bad picture will never love you back. And there, it gets to a point. Again, the software is getting better and better. I'm going to show you an example in a minute. That's pretty amazing what you can do with some of this software. But I also believe there's a fine line between relying on software and just getting it right the first time. And so if it's egregiously bad out of focus, I'll get rid of it. If it's bad exposure that I can't retrieve, I get rid of it. And so that goes back to exposure. And so it's a pretty straightforward way to evaluate images. You know, I know, and there's a lot of schools of thought on this, and I don't mean to demean any of them when I say this again, to make it really clear. What I said earlier, the way I'm explaining things tonight, it's just my way of doing things. It's not the only way to do things, but I know you'll hear all kinds of schools of thought: exposed to the right or exposed to the left on your histogram, or overexposed or underexposed or whatever. You know, because you can always bring stuff back, and all that's true. All that's true. But I'm of the belief, and maybe it's because I used to shoot film, and it used to sting whenever you'd mess up shooting film, sting financially. I've just always been an advocate of just it's good to understand the basics and to get it right. You know, pretty excited right now that the Texas Rangers, go Bob, are you a Rangers fan? Texas Rangers and Houston Astros are playing in the American League Championship Series. And the one thing I love about baseball is the fact that no matter how much the game is, how much technology's changed all around that game, they're still pretty much using the same bat that they've always used, just a wooden bat. That the technology, they won't allow it to change, because then it comes down to how good are your fundamentals and how good can you play this game with just using some basic equipment. And so that's kind of the question, or that's kind of the thing for me. I mean, I know the technology's changed, and I'm not anti-technology at all. I'm a believer that the technology is here to help us, but I'm also an advocate that, you know, understand the camera and get it right the first time, because the last thing I want to do is spend a lot of time taking pictures. But so I say all that to say, if a picture is a little bit picture's a little bit underexposed or overexposed, you can salvage that. Like this original picture of this wild pig right here that I took, uh, it was a little bit overexposed, and so all I did was took it down in Lightroom just a little bit to underexpose the foreground a little bit. You couldn't really see much detail in the pig anyway, but the sky was a little brighter in the original image, so I just moved my exposure over just a little bit, probably less than a stop, and I was able to get that. But I got it close to begin with. Had another question come in. How do you feel about taking out a distressing stick or whatever, provided you don't plan to enter into a contest? Well, thanks for that question, Beth. I don't, you know, there's times when I'll, you know, remove a distracting stick. I don't, you know, and it really, it's your question about contests. I don't enter a lot of contests. My contest has always been, and I did it today, and someone in the audience knows I did it today because I saw their name pop up. But I got asked to submit a cover picture or a possible cover picture for a magazine. And so today it was down to 2 pictures. And so I don't know which picture they picked, but you know, if they end up picking my picture for the cover, well, in my mind, I won that contest. So those are the kind of contests I enter. And so I will sparingly uh modify it, but I don't modify it to such a degree it's going to kind of impact the picture. Because the thing is, I think and also, Beth, it comes down to whether or not the rules allow it and what they'll allow. And I know that's an issue as well, because I entered a contest this year, but because of my poor planning, I wasn't able to enter my pictures into the contest because I was gone when we had to turn the images in. This was a really long contest. And what the gist of the contest was, you paired up with the landowner, you shot pictures for like 6 months and then turned them in at the end. And I was the landowner as well as the photographer. And so I was just gone and let the deadline slip, and so I missed it. And so on that contest, you could do some color correction, but you couldn't really take stuff out and add stuff in. But like in this picture of the wild pig, to answer your question, even 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 like I lost my train of thought. I was reading your follow up, Beth. The thing on this picture that I recognize and I accept is that nature's messy. I mean, it's a glorious mix of different size plants, different size animals, dirt, mud, rocks, everything in between. And so I'm kind of accepting of some of these things that you may see, like this, like that grass right there growing to the left of that pig's snout, or there's two blades there. That's a grass called side oaks grama. It's the state grass of Texas. Next to it, I can recognize it by the shape. It's western ragweed, and all of those things, and then all that brush in the back, mesquite trees. You could argue that's distracting, and it may be, but it's all part of the scene, and I generally tend to accept that if it's part of the scene. So I would, to answer your question more directly, if it's got that kind of element in it, I wouldn't necessarily kick it out. Really the main, to back up a little bit, the main points that I try to pick on pictures is the focus and the exposure. If it's out of focus or I can't save it, or if the exposure is bad, I'll always delete those. But again, the point of all of this is just to help you try to figure out a straightforward way to evaluate your images. So let's get into a little bit of territory where we haven't really covered yet. Oh, these are just some more pictures there. Just a pretty picture of the cypress swamps at Caddo Lake in East Texas. So really, once you kind of made that first, the F and the E of your image cuts, so that's what I do. I'll go through the first round and just delete all the bad ones, the ones that I think are out of focus beyond repair, or even if they're not out of focus. We've all done this where your camera's pointed at something and you accidentally hit the button and rattle off 40 pictures. I'll delete the purposely bad pictures based on focus and exposure. And then when I'm trying to decide which pictures do I really want to show off, this is where I get into here, the A and the T of the acronym FEAT that I came up with. And one is action. And ultimately I look for action to differentiate an image from an okay image to a really good one. One of the things I've talked about in the past is whenever I'm shooting pictures of any species of wildlife, and I purposefully picked on wildlife for this talk because I think it's easier to illustrate some of these concepts when you're talking about wildlife as opposed to more nuanced landscape photography. But when you're talking about wildlife, I always coach people to take one of three pictures, or all three pictures when you're talking about wildlife. I always try to get a yearbook, and if you've heard me talk about this before, you know what I'm talking about. I always try to get a yearbook shot, and what I mean by that is, think about in your high school yearbook, there's a picture of you somewhere in there with the rest of your classmates, side by side with your classmates, where it's just a simple, straightforward portrait of you. You can identify who you are, and so that's what I try to do, is get a yearbook picture of an animal. And then the second picture I try to take of that animal when I see it is a picture of that animal in its larger habitat. That may means I switch to a different lens. And let me see if I've got an example here. I don't think I do yet. Or like this coyote here on the upper right. That's a good example where it may be far off, or I switch to a different lens where I get, not only do I have a good picture of the animal, but it's not so frame filling like the mule deer on the left, where it's just dominating the whole image. It kind of gives you a little bit of context about where the animal lives and where the animal is photographed. So I'll do the yearbook shot. Then the second shot I'll take is, again, if I can, if an animal's walking in on a blind or a setup that I'm at, I usually try to do that when they're coming in before they get too close. And I just want to kind of show sort of what it looks like where I took that picture and what the animal lives. And then the third thing I try to do, that third shot, is I try to get a picture of the animal doing something. And that's where the action comes into play. And so that something can be defined in a lot of ways. So again, we're just building this, we're putting in the building blocks of this whole process. We're doing the focus first, the exposure second, the action third. And so you're just using the same process of kind of discerning one image from the next and what makes a really good image from an okay image. And I forgot what image it was. So here's an example of some three. So this mule deer on the left, he's doing a behavior. It's called the Flehmen. That's the scientific name of it, but all us regular folks call it a lip curl. And when they're in the rut and they're trying to check the air for a doe being in estrus, that's what they do. It's almost like if you think about how, and I'm not I don't know a lot about this. So if I'm wading into someone's territory where you're a lot more of an expert, I just know that they do it. But you know, when you nose a glass of whiskey or you nose a glass of wine, where you put your nose into it and smell of it and try to get the aromas and try to distinguish all those different flavor notes long before you drink it, or even when you drink it, where you kind of hold it in your mouth and let that flavor kind of permeate up through your nose. Deer do the same thing, and they've got a sensitive enough smell where they can just sniff the air if a doe's around. And what you can't see is a doe in this picture. They'll sniff the air where there's a doe around, and they can determine whether or not she's worth messing with at that point. Is she coming into heat? Is she in heat right now and ready to breed, or is she already bred? And so the movement is subtle, but because you get that subtle movement and you anticipate it and you take the picture, to me, this picture stood out more than all the other pictures I took around it, even though it's a beautiful buck and and the light is beautiful. All the things about it work, but it's that one little subtle movement. Or like the turkey here and the gobble. Again, the light's great, the pose is great. This is another example where if you look at that little fleshy appendage on the turkey's growing out of the turkey's head right there, it's called a snood. If you could see that picture bigger, the snood's out of focus. You know, there's some fuzzy parts on this picture, but one part that makes the one part that's in focus, it should be in focus is, and that's the eyeball. But then when you throw this action in there, but sometimes action's really subtle, like this mountain line at the bottom, and you get that minute, the minute they look at you, and you know that's the shot. I've got pictures of it looking away, and they're pretty good. But the minute he made eye contact with me, and he broke that third wall, so to speak, or the fourth wall, I can't remember what actors call it, where he looked straight at the camera, and I took his picture. That's the one of all the pictures I took of that mountain line, that's the one that stands out. And so before I go to the next one, let me show you this. I'm gonna let me share my screen with you right quick. I'm gonna go into Lightroom. Can everybody see Lightroom there? Bob, can you see it? Okay. So here's some pictures. These are some pictures that I thought were worthy of this dolphin shoot. And so as I'm going through there and I'm looking at it, so they all meet the criteria. The focus is good, the exposure is good, and then I get to action part. And so now I'm trying to distinguish what action is better than the other action, because I've got literally 100 pictures of this dolphin jumping. By the way, this is my 24 millimeter dolphin. Shot it right out of the back of a boat with 24 millimeter. The dolphin was feet away from me, so I concentrated on getting the composition right. So if you think about the rule of thirds, the water line isn't exactly in the rule of thirds because I couldn't get it all in there. I had to get the dolphin in. The water line's more towards the middle, but the sun kind of complements it, and then the island out there, and so everything kind of works good. And it's not a bad picture. The way I look at this, it's still a good one because if you notice here, all these pictures are labeled purple. If you ever follow my how to organize your images, I use purple as my last color because those are the ones that ultimately went to a client or went on my website. And so these are the best of the best. So these pictures are still good, but they're not the one. And so as I go through this and I look at that and I'm thinking, okay, that just checks all the boxes. It's in focus, the exposure's right, the action's good. But again, it's not the one. And same way here, because there's something, they're not bad pictures, but there's something off about it. And then I get to this one, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm getting closer. Because now we've got a lot of action. There's a lot of water, the sun looks good, and everything about it in my mind is going good. And then we get, and like I said, these are just a few, and these are my keepers out of that series of maybe 100. And then I get to this one, and I'm like, that's the one. And these pictures are uncropped. If you notice here on Lightroom, the only symbol they have is this little plus minus symbol at the bottom, and well, that one says this one's been added to a collection, but that just indicates that it's been edited in some way. So there's no crop marks, there's none of that stuff, because these are pretty much how they came out of the camera. I edited this one a little more to just change the white balance to give it a little more of a warm glow that you can tell the difference there. It's subtle, but you can tell. But ultimately, when I saw this one, it checked all the boxes for me. It's in focus. The action, I mean, the exposure was good, and the action was, of all of them, to me, the best, because it the islands are balanced off. I mean, if you, and I'm really kind of breaking this down now, but if you look in the other pictures, I didn't have all the islands in there, and that kind of bothers me. But if you look in this one, you can see the whole island back there. The dolphin, the sun is going down. Uh, the sun was going down, and the eyes in focus, and everything just worked right on that one in my mind. And that's why I jokingly call this the world's greatest dolphin picture, because I was pretty proud. That's another picture like the coyote, and I take a lot of pictures, and there's sometimes I'll look at it and think, okay, I'm really proud of that one. Will it ever win a contest, or will it ever be on a magazine, or will it ever grace the cover of Flipper Weekly? Probably not, but it doesn't really matter. It goes back to what I said earlier. A lot of this is kind of what you like, and what really sort of just visually appeals to you. And then Beth said, she put in a comment there, it's very helpful seeing several good ones and knowing which ones you thought were the best and why. And again, this is what I thought. Y'all may look at these pictures and think to yourself, well, I like picture number 4, or I like picture number 3, or whatever. But the reason why of all these pictures, I like this one the best because his body was out of the water the most. There's a lot. I mean, you can go into a lot of detail on this one. The water just dripping off of it is just, it looks really cool. It's got a little bit of splash in the air. It's got a little splash behind from the wake of the boat. The sun's at a perfect angle, and so everything kind of clicked at that moment. And sometimes when you're shooting pictures of wildlife, the thing you got to do is you just got to be confident in your settings. That's, I go back to earlier about the being good at the fundamental part, the mechanical of it, and then just taking a lot of pictures to help your vision kind of come to reality. If you listen to me webinars, I say this one a lot too, that when you're shooting digital photography, it's like you're playing slot machines and you're using the casino's money. Doesn't hurt to take a lot of pictures and learn to make mistakes. And I'll give you a little encouragement here. One of the things I talk about a lot, and we're all guilty of it. Everybody in this webinar is guilty of it. I'm guilty of it. But imagine for a second if we were as hard on, if you have children, if we were as hard on our children when they were trying to learn to walk as we're hard on ourselves when we're trying to learn photography. Where you get yourself in a box, you just don't want to make mistakes, and you're ashamed to make mistakes, and you're afraid to make mistakes. If I would have been that way with my kids, they never would have learned how to walk. I mean, I taught my kids to walk, or my kids learned to walk probably like y'all's kids learn to walk. They get up on their feet, they take a couple of steps, they fall down on the rear, and what do they always do? They get back up again and keep going till they finally figure it out. And that's what I encourage everybody to do when we're talking about photography. There's no dishonor in messing up and then trying and trying again. It's just just the experience of getting it figured out and getting it right is powerful in itself. And that's one thing that the AI will never replace, is just the experience of photography. Yeah, the day's going to come when I can probably type a description of this picture on the left and AI will make it for me, but it's not nearly as satisfying as getting to go out and understand that animal and put yourself in a position and have the technical knowledge of how that camera works, that when the moment happens and you know it and you recognize it and you're proficient at every single thing you can be proficient at, and you press the button, and then when you're getting back in your post processing, you're looking at your pictures, then it's not a matter of which picture you throw away. It's just a matter of discerning, of the 100 dolphin pictures I took, which one do I absolutely like the best? Because of the 100, 90 are still pretty good, but it's just which one's the absolute best. Does that make sense? And then really the last one in the T is timing. And I've got some other considerations I want to visit with you about when I'm done with this part of it. And timing makes a big difference on how your images look. It may refer to the time of day, or the one thing I didn't put here is, or the weather. Like on this picture of the bobcat, this picture was taken a couple of miles from here, and it was overcast day. I love overcast days for shooting pictures of wildlife. It kind of extends your day where you don't have to worry about the angle of the sun. And everything about it worked good. I was on the ground. That bobcat came walking out in front of me on the ground, and she spotted me, even though I was wearing a ghillie suit. If you don't know what a ghillie suit is, it's one of those bushy looking suits that snipers wear to stay hidden. And I was well hidden up in this brush, but she saw me nonetheless. And again, she's not doing anything overtly crazy. She's not catching a mouse, or she's not pouncing on something, but she just did the act of looking at me, and that's the action. That's all the action I needed to make this literally one of the favorite pictures I've ever taken of this bobcat. And again, not this one, but a companion picture to this bobcat, one I took when she was standing broadside to me, is hanging right there on my wall right now. So that's why I like this picture. It's just everything about it worked out good. Now, to your point earlier, Beth, yeah, there's a distracting stick to the right. There's a distracting stick behind her ear and behind her tail. But honestly, I guess if I was really getting technical about it, that may be something to address. But honestly, it doesn't bother me that much because again, nature in all of its imperfections is perfect. And so I think why mess with perfection, even though there's sticks behind it and all that other stuff. So I like it like this. And then what I forget there. Timing is I was reading this is the time of day when you take the image or the timing of the overall situation on the picture. And that may mean, the minute you click the button, what's going on, like this great horned owl. Uh he sat there for a while and then finally he ruffled his feathers and gave us the look. You know it when you see it, and took the picture and gave me just a little bit of action. But the white-tailed deer on the right, the only timing about that really worked out good for me was the time of day that he decided to stand underneath that tree, and I just happened to be at the right place at the right time, and really in a lot of ways, uh, at the right distance because I really like where you can see a lot of that tree around that buck, or like on the cypress swamps back in the spring when I was on Caddo Lake. Uh, the timing of being at the right place at the right time on the lake where when the sun came up, it was going to be between this group of four trees and it was just going to look beautiful. And that morning we had a little bit of steam. So timing is a lot of things. And so again, when I'm going through pictures and I'm trying to, back to those dolphin pictures, when I'm trying to decide which one's the best, I'm looking for those elements of timing that I think uh, is good. And but I'll tell you, sometimes I fail too. And I'll tell you a good example. This is the week of the Fannin County Fair, and my son, this is the first year he's got to enter a contest that wasn't where he was competing against youth in the youth division because he graduated high school last year. Now he enters with everyone else in the adult division, and so it was my job to look through his pictures he's taken, and I'm going to go through with him and curate what I think the best pictures are for him to enter in this Fannin County Fair photography contest. And the competitive part of me, and especially the competitive part and wanting my child to do well, is that I picked 5 pictures for him to enter. He entered one in the wildlife photography contest, in the domestic animal contest, in the domestic animal division, in the people division, in the black and white division. The land six categories: the landscape division, and then the flowers or flora division. And the only division he didn't enter, there were 7 categories, was like pictures at the fair. He didn't do anything like that. So of all of those he did, uh, because my plane was late yesterday, I didn't get to see when they unveiled who the winners were, but he told me about it because he was there. Well, he ended up winning. Uh, he ended up winning 2 best of shows, 2 first place, and 2 second places. And the competitive part of me, want my child to do well, is I told him, well, I didn't pick right. I mean, I should have been better at picking the pictures, and you maybe could have got all first or more best of shows. But I'm still proud of him. He did well, and that's just water under the bridge. But that's. But I say that to say sometimes I don't think I always pick right because that's how subjective all of this is. That sometimes you may pick good, sometimes you may not pick good. But I always try to maintain the same things I just walked you through. The focus, the exposure, the action, and then the timing. Those are every single time I look at a picture, those are the things that, even though it's subconscious now, that I'm looking at when I'm trying to pick which one's the best. And a lot of times it's subtle. Picture the owl here. It may have been half a second before when his feathers weren't as ruffled, which is still a good picture, but in my mind, it's not that one. Or it may be the picture of the buck when 2 seconds earlier his head was turned where he's a full profile. But for whatever reason, I like the timing of that head turn better. Think it made him look more alert because it makes me think he's looking straight at me. And so you may not always get it right, and that's fine. I don't always get it right, and that's fine. but it's just the act of going through each one of those steps that I think that ultimately makes you a better photographer, because once you kind of understand what you're looking for in the back end, it makes it easier to capture on the front end because you know it when you see it, and it's easier to take that picture. Hope that makes sense to everybody. So I got a couple other things to consider. So don't run away yet. Uh, this is so the picture I showed you. Let me go back. The picture I showed you earlier, that one. So that's when the coyote was running past me, and you can see he's not making eye contact with me. And then as he, it's always faster going forward than backwards. I mean backwards than forwards. Okay, there we go. As he ran past me, I used the country boy trick I learned a long time ago, and it's just a simple noise. You can make coyotes stop. You can make deer stop. If deer are running, you can make them stop. And then I made that noise, and and I am a so let me, before I tell you what the noise is and I spoil the surprise, uh let me just say I'm a non-college partisan, so my choice of noises does not implicitly uh does not implicitly endorse any college university program, since we're in the midst of college football. But if you're from Texas and you hear like the Aggie war cry, what they say, that whoop, that's that's what I did. And not because it's Aggies, because I learned, someone taught me a long time ago, if a coyote's running, you want to stop, just make that sound whoop at it and they'll stop. And so remember, having that little bit of information filed in my Rolodex, as that thing ran by me, I made that sound and he turned around not knowing where the sound came from, and he looked, and because of that look in his eyes and the perfect glint of sun on him and those ears turned back like that, that was the moment. That was the timing. And when I saw it, I laid down on the hammer, let the camera take care of the autofocus that did it right. Now, as I look at this, if I'm being real critical of myself, I could have composed it better, because it should be shifted to the right a little bit to kind of conform more with the rule of third norms. It's a little bit too much in the middle for me, but I wanted to show you the full thing. I could always go back and crop it a little bit, and that would improve the composition, but that's the way that all went down right there. But that's when we talk about timing and we talk about action, that's where everything comes together on a shot like this: the focus, the exposure, the the action, and the timing. That's where it gets encapsulated right there in a moment like that, and that's what you're looking for. And if you prepare yourself in the fundamentals of the game, just like next week when the Rangers start whooping up on the Houston Astros, every time a 98-mile-an-hour fastball is thrown, all those fundamentals come into play at one time, and you're always going to hit a home run. And that's what happens here. And so that's what I want to encourage you to do. But there's a few more things to consider, though, as we're talking about what I pick. And I mentioned this before, but I think it goes without saying. Not all the pictures can be winners. You just need to learn to accept that and understand that you're going to take some really good pictures and you're going to take some not so good pictures. And people tell me this all the time: man, you take awesome pictures. You know what I tell them in return? Because you don't get to see the bad ones. I take my share of bad pictures, and it's true. I feel like I take some good ones, and I'm that blind hog who finds an acorn. It's something I've always wanted to do, and taught myself how to do it, and had some mentors inspire me along the way, and just tried and tried and tried, and not be afraid to make any mistakes. But but even today, these pictures I'm showing you, I'm not showing you the bad ones. I'm just showing you the good ones, because the bad ones, remember what I said earlier, don't fall in love with something that's not going to love you back, and a bad picture is never going to love you back. So once those pictures get on my website, get on my computer, the first thing that happens to them is I kick them out, and they go to wherever recycled photographic souls go to somehow enter back on your memory cards and maybe try to get reincarnated to be used again. So not all of them can be winners. That's the first thing I want to remind you of. And then the second thing, it doesn't have to be a knockout picture. Does it fit the story you're trying to tell? And so this is something I've talked about in the past on using your pictures to tell a story. And I'll give you an example here. So let me switch back over to Lightroom. There we go. And let me go. This is another. I actually use these pictures that I've never have taken out of this quick collection. These are pictures I took that I used to kind of illustrate how to tell a story with your pictures. And so, yeah, you got some good standard pictures of, bears being bears. And, then you're talking about a picture like this where, the it's just the claws. Well, I mean, it's just the claws that, you could argue, well, you cut his head off. Well, I did cut his head off, but that was on purpose. That was when the bear was so close, I couldn't get the whole thing in the frame. And so I did the second best thing I could do is I started doing detail shots. Now, this picture would never win a contest, but if I'm trying to tell a story about my adventure on this little outpost in Alaska, this one right here, it that's one of those pictures that's worth 1,000 words. And even like the tracks, even, and then more bears. And there's the picture I was talking about where that's the picture of the bear doing something. This would be a yearbook shot like that. You just tell what it is. It's nothing, even though the bear's walking, this would be like a yearbook shot where you're just telling what it is. This would be like an action shot here. Hey, you guys coming in late. I noticed we had a few. I think there was a little bit of confusion on the time. The webinar actually started at 7 o'clock, but 7 o'clock Texas time. But you're in luck. I've been recording this, so if you feel free to hang around to the end of it. But if you want to see the whole thing, I'm gonna send this out probably tomorrow to everyone that has signed up to be on the webinar. Y'all get first look at it. And I want to encourage you to watch it because I think we've had a lot of good information shared tonight, a lot of good questions. But anyway, as I go through these pictures, there's a picture I was talking about of the bear, of the animal kind of in his element there. Of all the pictures I took, this is one of the most mundane, but it's my favorite shot of that whole shoot. Because you want to talk about a picture's worth 1,000 words. To me, this is it. It's got the landscape that the bears live in. It's got the tidal flats that they feed in. It's got a picture of the tracks. And those tracks, I couldn't have placed them better, leading in that little serpentine curve, leading your eye away from the scene. And that I looked for that picture the whole time while I was up there. And so I show you all these to reinforce that fact that I was talking about, is that some pictures, they may not be the greatest in the world. They may never win you a contest, but they help illustrate a point you're trying to tell in your photo story. Like that picture right there, I could enter it in 5 million contests and it's never going to win. Never. But it kind of helps tell the story of the area that we were in. And the same way with these flowers. I mean, I've seen better flower pictures, and that's okay. But as you kind of go through this, you just realize all of these pictures help support the main narrative of all the bears that live along Tuxedni Bay, along Cook Inlet in Alaska. So that's what I want to share with you there. Let me switch back here. All right, are we back on Keynote, Bob? Give me a nod if we are. Okay, good deal. Does it fit the story you're trying to tell? And then another thing to consider is, does it illustrate a concept? If you're and one of the things I encourage people to do when they go on workshops with me is, yeah, it's pretty easy to take pictures of the pretty places or the pretty things you see, like the wildlife, but there's a lot bigger story to tell. And so I know what a lot of people do is they'll have these picture books made. And so what I try to encourage people to do is take a lot of pictures, try to illustrate the concepts about what that place is like, or try to tell the whole story of pick the place. You can fill in the blank, but try to pick the whole story try to tell the whole story of that place, which would include the landscapes and the wildlife, but also includes the plants and flowers and everything else in that little niche that makes that whole place kind of operate. And so it could also mean that I look at, does it illustrate a concept? Like, again, those flower pictures I just showed you, they're not by any stretch of the imagination, they're not great or anything to write home about. They're kind of first grade level attempts at taking flower pictures, but they help illustrate the concept, the overall concept of where those bears live and what are the other things you see around it. Every good story has a few parts. They've got a beginning, a middle, and end. Our story as people all have those same parts: the beginning, the middle, and the end. And it's everything in between there that matters the most. It's all those details you see, or all those experiences you live, or that one little glint of light, on a mountain, or just all those things. And so, if you may not take a picture that has, just over the top action like this one, or something that's in great light like the coyote, but it's okay, because it all helps tell that story, and it all helps tell about your experience. So one of these days, when someone cares to go through your pictures and look at them, they'll realize that you were more than one dimensional when you took these pictures. You were really trying to express your love of that place where you went. And so that's another factor I want to consider. And sometimes is a one of a kind picture that can never be duplicated. 100% of pictures ever taken of Bigfoot are blurry. We all know that, but people take them anyway because it can never be duplicated. And so if that's the case, then sometimes it's okay to mess up and it's okay to keep a bad picture if it's something that never can be duplicated. And then this is a big thing. I want to really kind of flesh this out with you a little bit. What may be the future of that image? And so I try to keep that in mind as well, because I'm gonna show you something in a minute. It's kind of crazy, but I'm gonna show you anyway. If you probably already know this, but I'm just gonna share this with you anyway. With some of the regenerative or the generative tools, AI tools that we can use today, that have come out on the new Photoshop, and even the new version of Lightroom has a background defocusing generative tool now. And so you got to start thinking, this picture may not be what I want it today, but what will it be like when the software improves? And so I say that because there's a number of pictures, once the software has kind of improved a little bit, I'm going back and taking another shot at them that, because of mistakes I made originally, or mistakes that, I'll show you one in a minute in particular I'm talking about, or mistakes that just in the overall quality of the picture, there's nothing I could do about it back in the day, but today I can. And that's the crazy thing about where this thing is changing. So as long as it's in focus and it's got all those kind of things, all those feet elements we talked about, as long as it's got all those, there may be some imperfections with it that I've been keeping them for a while, but now all of a sudden they're gaining new life. And so here's a picture we'll share with you right now. I did a story for a magazine a few years ago called The Secret Life of Bobcats. And my hypothesis was pretty simple. I hypothesized that bobcats live all around us. I saw a question coming out. I'll answer in just a second. My hypothesis was that bobcats live all around us, but you never see them, because when I lived in Childress, Texas, I knew there were bobcats around. I just never saw them, but I knew they were there. And so that was kind of the basis. And so with the permission of the local game warden, every time there was a deer killed on the highway near my house, because I lived down a county road, every time there was a deer killed on the highway close to my house, with the game warden's permission, because in Texas it's illegal to pick up game animals off the side of the highway. And they do that because some redneck would, instead of using a gun to take out a deer, a gun or a bow, they'd just run over stuff. And so it's illegal to take game animal off the side of the highway, but unless you have permission. So I had permission from him. So I'd drive my tractor down the roads, pick up these dead deer with my tractor and bring it back. And I would put them on my property. And within the first deer I laid out there, within minutes, and this is the picture here, or within a day or two, a bobcat started coming up and eating on it. And that bobcat, it's looking, this is what I found out later, is kind of cool. When I went down and looked at my pictures, I'm scrolling through them and I see this scene right here, and that bobcat's looking like where I just walked from. And I looked at the time it was taken, and it was taken like literally 1 minute before I went and checked my camera. And so that bobcat was looking at me coming down the trail, and then it slipped away and hid, and I never saw it when I took this picture. Well, but I'll get back to the picture. What I figured out was, when I did that story, it may interest you, and this is crazy to me even to still think about it, even though I've seen the data that supports this. The most densely populated areas for bobcats in the state, you might think it's deep East Texas in the woods, or maybe far West Texas out in the mountains or canyons, or some of the South Texas brushlands. The most densely populated areas for bobcats in the state of Texas, in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And that's crazy when you think about it, but it just tells you they're so stealthy, they can live amongst us and you never saw them. I never saw that bobcat with my own eyes. And I used a camera trap to take a picture with this. So this picture was taken with a 16mm lens and a camera trap. I would set it out by this deer, when the bobcat would walk in front of it, I'd take his picture. Now, the thing that's always disappointed me about this picture, but because it checked off most of the boxes on that feet, I kept it. But the thing that most disappointed me about this picture is, you can guess it, I cut off his body, or I didn't. The way the bobcat was standing. It was misaimed. This would still be an all right picture, but I always wonder, what would it look like. Well, with these generative tools on Photoshop, now you can know, because I did this right before this meeting started, and it's crazy. It's all I did was use the crop. I'll show you what I did. Hang on, let me do this. Well, I may not be. All I did was, oh, it's thinking about it. There we go. There's the original image. All I did was pick the crop tool and then drug this out on the side like that, and then hit generate. And it's going to, all the monkeys are going to be working in the background doing this. And then in a minute, it'll give you 3 choices of which one you think you like the best. Is it cheating? Probably. Would I condone that for a contest? Probably not. But look, it gives me 3 choices on which one I like the best. There's the 3 choices it gives me. Which I look at it, and honestly, when I'm looking at it, I mean, it looks all right. And so that's what I mean with, sometimes you keep a picture not knowing what the not knowing what the future technology is going to be able to allow you to do to fix that picture. I've got one picture I'm thinking about that was barely out of focus, but it was one of those pictures. It was a swift fox, and I was one of the first ones in Texas to document the existence of swift fox in Texas, because up to that time, I think it'd been 20 or 30 years since one had been seen in the state, and some biologists thought they were just disappeared from the state. Well, by stroke of luck, and me being the Forrest Gump character that I am, I happened to be at the right place at the right time, and I saw these swift fox. Originally, I thought they were baby coyotes, but I realized what they were pretty quick. I was up near Dalhart, Texas, in the far northwestern corner of the Panhandle, and I took pictures of them. And one thing that always disappointed me is one of those pictures was just bare. His eyes were barely out of focus. It was just enough to bother me. Well, with these new tools like Topaz, fixed it, and I was able to retrieve it. Like I said, is that ethical, or is that proper? That's a whole argument for another time. But I'm just saying, you saw it right there with your own eyes, that you can do that, and how easy it is to just make a simple repair to an image all of a sudden like that. And then let me go back here to Keynote. Bob, we good? Can you see Keynote back? All right. Okay, we do have a question here. Let's see. Took some pictures of dragonflies, and the pictures came out small. Some were good, but I was discouraged because they had to be enlarged to really see it. How do you handle pictures like that? How much can you zoom out and call it a good picture? Oh, that's a good question. Really, I think it's always best, and I'm going to sound like I don't mean to sound like an overt commercial here, but whoever asked that question, I don't know your name, because all I have is an email. I'm going to share with you a website here in a second. If you go back, and I've got a uh, video on that website about how to shoot dragonfly pictures, and so that may give you a little insight there. But I will say, don't be too hard on yourself, because dragonflies are really, 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 really hard to photograph, and a lot harder than I thought they would be when I first started trying to figure it out. And so the question about how much is too much to zoom, I think once you start seeing some degradation of the image, you've probably gone a little bit too far, because there is such thing as zooming too much. I'm always an advocate. I think it's good technique to try to get as close as you can. Back when I started doing this and teaching people about photography 30 years ago, I had one simple slideshow I used to do, and this was literally a slideshow, because I've got the slides that I had made that said the 3 points are: keep the sun at your back, use the rule of thirds, and get close. Those are kind of the 3 elements of wildlife photography, and I still think that that's one of the elements. But I think, again, to answer your question directly, just that kind of comes with your eye. Is the more you zoom in on it, you'll start seeing where the image starts to degrade a little bit, and it also has to do with what's kind of the final output of your image, and what you plan on doing with it. You can get by with cropping a lot if people are just looking at your images on like on Facebook on their phone, But when you get into some of the more the publishing stuff, uh, or the getting big prints made, then it becomes really obvious. It's really kind of the end result of what you want to do. But I think the better answer is, one, don't get discouraged, because that's the worst thing you can do, because for every problem there's a solution. And number two, just don't be afraid to fail. Just get out and try. But I will share that with you, and I'll share that website with you in a minute if you want to go by and take a look at that. Okay, thank you, Linda, on that. So I hope that made sense. Uh, Carolyn says helpful webinar. I appreciate that comment, Carolyn. Does anybody else have any other questions? I got a couple more things I'll share with you. And if no one else has any questions, then I guess we're done. But like I said, I'll if you miss something, then you'll be getting this webinar. You'll get this webinar probably tomorrow via email, so you can watch it again. And so Carrie asked, when will you be doing your process webinar again? Is that the one you're talking about, managing your photo collection? You know, kind of how you, okay. Yeah, that was it. Probably pretty soon. I haven't secured a date yet, but I'll be doing that one again, kind of as a replay with B&H Photo. They've asked me to jump on board with them, and they've asked me to jump on board with them and help. We're going to co-present that one. So it's going to go through their platform, but I'm going to do that for them. So that'll be coming up pretty soon. So a lot of times, and it's becoming more and more often, when another entity asks me to do a webinar, then if y'all get my newsletter, then I'll direct you to their link instead of mine. Uh, thank you, Mary Beth. Thank you. Yeah, so just if you want to watch that webinar, if you subscribe to my newsletter, just be watching out for that. You know, I just try to launch a newsletter every month, and at the first of the month, and kind of tell you what's coming up. And then here's the all the info on that. If you want to stay in touch, you know, again, like I said at the beginning, I'm always willing to talk about this stuff. Send me an email if you want to. If more often than not, if it's something we can't figure out via email, I'll just ask if you want to just be prepared. I'll just say, let's jump on a Zoom meeting and help you get figured out. Because I believe in helping people and I love helping people. And then hackberryfarmtexas.com. If you remember the old wildlife photo show, uh, I redid that site, and so the wildlife photo show site will take you now to hackberryfarmtexas.com, and then on that site, as soon as you open it up, there'll be a slide out that says, if you want to stay in touch or hear about what's coming up, just put your email address in and you'll get added to the newsletter list so you can hear about all that other stuff coming up. And so Linda, if you go to that site again, hackberryfarmtexas.com, and you look up wildlife photo show, if you scroll down, you may have to scroll a little bit because there's a bunch of videos on there. But if you scroll down, you'll see one with how I photograph hummingbirds, or how I photograph dragonflies. And if you can't find that, send me an email and I'll just send you the link directly. And then let's see, let me get caught up on questions. Thank you. Oh, thanks, Bob, for that comment. And I already told Mary Beth, thank you for that. And thanks, Barbara. Really appreciate everybody listening. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate all that as well. So I think that's it. I think have you ever seen a bobcat winking at you? There you go. If you've never seen one before, that's the last one. I shot that with my camera trap. It's the same bobcat you saw a while ago. That's when everything works out good. I mean, yeah, the dead deer is kind of gross, but that's that imperfectly perfect nature that all comes along. And it's I know it's not easy to stomach sometimes, but the fact of life is, in nature, in order for one thing to live, something else has to die. So that's just the circle of life. And so with that, I want to say thanks, and like I said, stay in touch if you have any questions. Oh, let me make sure. I think another question or two came in. Let me make sure I'm not leaving anybody out. Oh, nope. I think that's it. Yeah, thanks everybody. Really appreciate it. And again, stay in touch if you need anything. Always glad to help, and I will see you on the next webinar. Appreciate it. Bye, y'all. Hey, Leslie, I didn't know you were back there. Oh,